understanding that he is a spirit soul, Aham Brahmasmi, he is no longer affected by lamentation or hankering. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 1854, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma na sochati na kankshati. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita 15:7, the Lord says, Amavamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana mana sastanandriyan mana sastananindriyani prakriti stani karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. The living entity is actually part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is unaffected by material conditions. But because the mind, mana, is affected, the senses are affected, and the living entity struggles for existence within the material world. Om Jnana Timrandasya Jananjana Shalaka Chakshurumitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Revacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we see the advice of these two great sages, Angira Rishi and Narad Muni. They continue to instruct Chitraketu about his current dilemmas and condition, and they're imparting great knowledge to King Chitraketu, who is of course very bewildered by his current circumstances of having lost his son. So of course when he got that boon, understanding was that he'll be a source of great jubilation, because he had so many millions of wives, King Chitraketu, but of course he had no sons, and so he was always lamenting and wanting a son. So of course eventually when he does get a son, then the other wives get together and poison him. So now the son is dead, and of course he's in a very, very pitiful state. So in this verse, Prabhupada is of course also mentioning, it's a continuation from the previous verse. And, we heard from yesterday, Agari Krishna's class, that this, situation we are in the material world, where, objects like wife, children, property, that all of these things are like dreams and a mental concoction. So very, very hard to believe, because, we're all living in this world. And it is, in one sense, very natural to have family, to have wife. Not everybody, of course, will take a wife, but it is a very, very natural process in the material world to have, possessions, property, cars, so many things. And so yesterday we learned that these things are all like a dream. And of course, it centers on the pivot that, everything in the material world is very, very temporary. And so this is the main point, that, everything in the material world is very, very temporary. So here we're learning that, through the mind, the living entity is suffering this threefold miseries. And of course, it is a repeated, continuous thing that the living entity is suffering. So adiaboltic is misery caused by other living entities. So, so many examples are there of misery caused by other living entities. For example, I was reading one class, Prabhupada was mentioning bed bugs. Bed bugs come at night and, just chew you up. And, in the morning, you got so much of lumps on your body, and sometimes it can be associated with pain as well. And so, this is a typical condition of Adiboltic. And then I was just remembering, there was one time, I forget which temple it was, but Prabhupada was traveling, of course, around the world so many times, and he noticed there was one Mataji, falling asleep in his class. And so at the end of the class, he inquired from her, too much of service, what is going on? And she said, oh, Prabhupada, I couldn't sleep last night because there was bed bugs. And he said, yes, I know. They're in my room also. And so he gave her some advice that, what you need to do is these bed bugs, they only come out when, you're falling asleep or fell asleep, as soon as you fall asleep. So Prabhupada pretends like he's falling asleep, and then the bed bugs comes out, and then he picks them up and he puts them out the window. And so, of course, this Mataji tried that, but very, very difficult thing to achieve, to pretend like you're falling asleep. And, she continuously was falling asleep at night. So sorry, just some bed bug drama there. So then the other condition that we're suffering, of course, is, there's heavy snowfalls, there's severe cold. This past winter was, definitely a severe winter for us. Then, of course, so many parts of the world, severe heat. Summer's coming for us. Then, of course, we're hearing in so many parts of the world, even I think a couple of days ago, earthquake in New Zealand, famine, of course, going on so many places in the world, wars going on in so many places of the world. And so these things are all caused by the devas, Adi Devik. So, higher, uh, so these things are all under higher control, uh, of material nature. And so we can't really control, the snow, the heat, the temperature, so many things. We can't control these things. So they're arranged by the devas. And lastly, of course, the uh, acute suffering that, we, the living entities, continuously suffer on a day-to-day basis, minute to minute, second to second, every moment of our life, day and night, there's just no getting away from, is the mind. And so this seems to be, the essence of all of our sufferings. And so in this verse, it is explaining that through the mind, the living entity suffers these threefold tribulations. And of course, Prabhupada in the purport, he is gradually imploring us, referring to these verses from the Bhagavad Gita, 1854, one who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. And then he further quotes 15:7. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts and parcels. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So gradually we need to come to this realization. And how to come to this realization? We are seeing from, this chapter or these verses, where one can only get out of this, cycle of suffering, so to speak, in the material world, if one comes into contact with a pure devotee of the Lord. If somehow the other one can come into contact with a pure devotee of the Lord, then he will be able to impart transcendental knowledge to you. Of course, there is requirements of, how one surrenders to such an entity, to such a spiritually advanced entity. So there's, just so many requirements there. But if one somehow the other can come into contact with such an elevated soul, then there is hope of one getting out of this cycle of misery that we're learning is being mainly caused by the mind. The mind seems to be the pinnacle of all of these things. So gradually we, learned previously, about in the Bhagavad Gita about the modes of material nature, the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And so ultimately we see that we want to get to the mode of goodness, get above Rajagun, get above Tamagun, and there's so much of descriptions given in the Bhagavad Gita of these three different of persons in these three different modes, and we see that persons in the Tamagun phase, are, for example, you know, we can all decide which modes of nature we want to act in. But for example, people lying in the streets, they think they're very, very happy. But of course, we can understand that they're mainly in the mode of ignorance. Then, of course, there's Rajagun, and Rajagun means that we are full of lust and anger. This is, one of the main symptoms of Rajagun. And then, of course, the mode of goodness, one can say that if you're not in the mode of passion or ignorance, then you could be situated in the mode of goodness. But again, we learn from the Shastra that just, living in the mode of goodness might not be good enough, because ultimately we learn from the Shastra that it means we need to take another body. If we just continuously try, for example, to do good things, be good, have clean habits. Sometimes people say, I was born in a Brahmin family, and they definitely have a lot of training in terms of being in the mode of goodness, but still, so many things can be lacking. Um, in terms of transcendental knowledge. And this is the key, that we are spirit soul, that this is not our home. And, trying to build a nice house, have a nice family, have nice children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, and, in this way, continue the legacy, so-called legacy of, my family name and uh, our family values has no ultimate meaning, because it just means that we take another birth if we just continue to do good in the world. So we don't want to just do good and be good and just um, become a philanthropist, for example. Um, no, it means that we will take another birth. We want to, of course, rise from the modes of ignorance to the mode of passion of ignorance, passion and ignorance, passion, to the mode of passion, and then get to the mode of goodness, and then use the mode of goodness as a springboard to get onto the transcendental platform. Because how to get onto the transcendental platform otherwise? We can't just go straight from the mode of ignorance to the transcendental platform. Of course, one can argue that by taking up devotional service, one can gradually elevate oneself from the mode of ignorance. So we want to, do this, get to the mode of goodness if we're not there yet already, and, cultivate these types of habits. And, Bhagavad Gita is very, very clear about the symptoms, of one in the mode of goodness. So we can, learn all of these things from the Bhagavad Gita. And, once we're in the mode of goodness, then, we can have some hope of making further advancement on the spiritual platform and getting out of this cycle of birth and death and going back home, back to Godhead. There's one nice verse I saw from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 22, 14, 15, that summarizes these last two verses. Um, it says, the translation is, in this way, the conditioned soul becomes the servant of lusty desires. And when these are not fulfilled, he becomes the servant of anger and continues to be kicked by the external energy Maya. Wandering and wandering throughout the universe, he may by chance get the association of a devotee physician whose instructions and hymns make the witch of the external energy flee. The conditioned soul thus gets into touch with devotional service to Lord Krishna, and in this way he can approach nearer and nearer to the Lord. So in this way, this is our only hope of, coming into contact with saintly devotees and, beginning our journey of bhakti in devotional service and, gradually elevating ourselves, understanding that, we are spirit soul, that we are eternal, fragmental parts and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in this way, practice so that we can become residents of the spiritual world after leaving this body. So, of course, by Prabhupada's inconceivable mercy, we have this special benediction, despite being in this age of Kali Yuga, such a degraded time in society, we can just look around us, look at how, people are suffering. If you're not convinced, you can turn on the TV and listen to the news and, get more of a dismal picture. Yeah, I stopped consuming the news for several months now, and there's just so much more time for devotional service as a result. So, yes, everybody is, suffering these threefold miseries. Prabhupada gives the example in so many places. It's similar to a trident on the chest of the living entity, just constantly being poked by this trident. So, of course, Prabhupada gives the example of Durga Devi. You must have seen pictures of her carrying a trident, riding on a lion. And so, of course, she's attacking the demons in this posture of, holding the trident against these demons. So, in a similar way, we are also afflicted by the three modes of material nature and, suffering in this hellish condition. But, constantly trying to manipulate the material energy, trying to extract some happiness from the material world. The sooner we realize that there's no happiness in the material world, the better, so that we can make plans and arrangements of how to get out of the cycle of birth and death. So that's all I had prepared at the last moment. So devotees, please be merciful and share some thoughts and realizations on this verse. Wow, so many devotees. And if at some point, if you all can excuse me, I'm going to have to escape and keep traveling. Nobody's got any contributions to the three kinds of tribulations that we are experiencing on a second by second basis. Adi Bautik, Adi Devik, and Adi Atmik.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol.
Thank you. Thank you for your class. Under extenuating circumstances, I have a few thoughts. Reminded of some verses. We have some time, so I thought I could
Please.
read a little. There's this problem of the mind, central to all the senses, but the mind creates all kinds of concoctions, resulting in suffering. There is what is that now? Well, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that The mind can be both the friend and the enemy of the living entity. That is Bhagavad Gita 6, and 6, 7 says, Bandhur atmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jitaha atmanatu chaturtve varte tatmaiva chaturvat. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. The purport Srila Prabhupada says that the purpose of practicing the eightfold yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. Unless the mind is controlled, the practice of yoga for show is simply a waste of time. One who cannot control his mind lives always with the greatest enemy, and thus his life and its mission are spoiled. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. The next verse reads, Jivatmana prasatansya paramatma samahitaha chitosha sukadukeshu tata mana pamanaya yoho. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. And Srila Prabhupada comments, actually, every living entity is intended to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. When the mind is misled by the external illusory energy, one becomes entangled in material activities. Therefore, as soon as one's mind is controlled through one of the yoga systems, one should be considered to have already reached the destination. One has to abide by superior dictation. When one's mind is fixed on the superior nature, he has no alternative but to follow the dictation of the Supreme. The mind must admit some superior dictation and follow it. The effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of Paramatma, or Supersoul, because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness. The devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence, namely distress and happiness, cold and heat, etc. This state of practical samadhi or absorption, this state is practical samadhi or absorption in the Supreme. So Srila Prabhupada is describing, in particular, the process of Ashtanga Yoga, which elevates one to the platform of understanding Paramatma, directly perceiving the Lord within the heart. But he's stressing the importance here of controlling the mind in order to overcome the distresses created by the mind and to be able to fix the mind on Krishna as Paramatma within the heart. And this brings to mind another verse, because the mind has created these dualities. How do we practically deal with that? So Srila Prabhupada is, on the one hand, um, we are directed to fix the mind on Krishna, but still there are these dualities that torment us. In the last report that I read here, by the way, Gita 6-7, Srila Prabhupada talks about having another senior moment. I forget what I wanted to say. Sorry. Um, Entanglement, that by interacting, reacting to um, these concoctions created by the mind, um, uh, so there are these dualities that are created. We have heat and cold, for example. So one may react to heat and cold by trying to make adjustments in order to be comfortable when there is excessive heat or excessive cold. But the dilemma in material life is that when we attempt to make adjustments of any sort, for our comfort or our enjoyment, the result invariably is further entanglement. We become more deeply enmeshed in the process of cause and effect. Our actions create additional reactions, and so we perpetuate the cycle of action and reaction, and we become further bound by that. So, how to interrupt that cycle? And that's described by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, text 14, in which he says, Matra sparshastu kuntayas, kitoshna sukadukada, agama hayanodipyastam statikshasva bharata. He says, O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So the process to interrupt the entanglement, the perpetuation of cause and effect, is simply to tolerate. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, in the proper discharge of duty, one has to learn to tolerate non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. According to Vedic injunction, one has to take his bath early in the morning, even during the month of Magh, which is January, February. It is very cold at that time. But in spite of that, a man who abides by the religious principles does not hesitate to take his bath. Similarly, a woman does not hesitate to cook in the kitchen in the months of May and June, the hottest part of the summer season. One has to execute his duty in spite of climatic inconveniences. Similarly, to fight is the religious principle of the Kshatriyas, and although one has to fight with some friend or relative, one should not deviate from his prescribed duty. One has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to rise to the platform of knowledge, because by knowledge and devotion only one can liberate himself from the clutches of Maya, illusion. So tolerating and not interacting with the conditions imposed by the material nature and concocted by our mind is part of means by which we interrupt that cycle and extricate ourselves from, or at least prevent further entanglement. But we have to fix our mind somehow or other on Krishna by any means. The easiest means in this age, of course, is chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And Srila Prabhupada has also prescribed for us regular study of the books, because typically we're not able to simply hear and chant consistently throughout the day. Our mind is very restless. It demands engagement. So Srila Prabhupada has recommended study of his books. By doing that, we can fill the mind with lots of subject matter for contemplation, and it becomes easy to have the mind always engaged in thinking of Krishna all throughout the day. If you study regularly, your mind will naturally be full of topics of Krishna, and everything that you see and experience will remind you of those topics that you heard. And in meeting other individuals and conversing with them, those things that you have read will come to mind, and you'll be able to share them. So you're hearing Krishna Gita, speaking Krishna Gita, hearing and chanting on a broader scale than simply chanting japa. Same process of hearing and chanting, but expanded into discussing topics about Krishna, or words spoken by Krishna, words spoken by Krishna's devotees. There is endless scope for meditation on Krishna. By that process, one can easily elevate himself and extricate himself from the entanglement of material nature. Automatically, we are able to tolerate the onslaught of the material nature, heat and cold, happiness and distress. The effect is muted. We are instead absorbed in the ecstasy of hearing and chanting Krishna Katha. And that process purifies the heart and elevates us to the point at which we can always remember Krishna 24 hours a day, even in dreams. Eventually coming to a stage at which we are unable to forget Krishna for a moment. And eventually we acquire love for Krishna. And then our meditation on Krishna becomes particularly concentrated and intense. And that's the perfection that we are aspiring for. Dhruva actually asked me to try to fill in here because he knew that he was going to have to take off in a hurry, and well, I had virtually no time to prepare. And coincidentally, I also, due to some unfortunate circumstances, I got less than 1 hour of sleep last night. So I'm a little foggy, but you all can help me out here with a question. If anyone has any questions or comments, that would be delightful. And I'm going to say that you can feel free to ask any question on any subject, and not just necessarily what we have discussed here today. I'll try to address anything at all, just to keep the Krishna Katha flowing. Hare Krishna.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. I have a question. A broad question. I was reading in Chaitanya Charitamrita the other day about Nagari the hunter, And Srila Prabhupada wrote several times in one purport how one should not store food for the next day, but only keep enough of what they need for that day, and the rest they should rely on Krishna to supply food or needs, necessities to maintain themselves. So I was wondering how that applies in sort of also keeping in mind the sense of like there's this mentality of, oh, you should also have some like financial background or some financial stability because you don't want to, or not you don't want to, but if you like if something happens and you don't want to be like a burden on the ISKCON movement, or you don't want to be like overly burdened on the temple that they have to provide everything for you, where in one sense you could also have some like financial storage in the background to supply for those like gaps. So I'm just wondering maybe if you could explain if you're understanding what I'm kind of saying.
I can expand on that. If that was a question, I'm not sure what the question was, but what you're describing is a relatively advanced stage. Um, it is the standard practice for sannyasi to abandon all varieties of um, endeavor for bodily maintenance and simply rely um, upon Krishna for everything. So sannyasi keeps no possessions. Um, he doesn't even for his eating. He may beg alms, but he doesn't acquire more than what he can consume in the course of a day. He doesn't keep or hoard anything. That is not prescribed for just anyone and everyone. As I say, it's appropriate for a sannyasi who has been cultivating Krishna consciousness, um, presumably, presumably for some period of time before the acceptance of sannyas comes to a point at which he gradually is capable of accepting such a high level of renunciation. For others, the prescription is different. So, particularly for us, what is recommended is the example that was set by Rupa Goswami, that one maintains some quantity of Lakshmi. If you have some particular income, immediately 50% of that is given to the cause of a devotional service in some way, and then 25% is used for one's own maintenance and the maintenance of one's family, if you have a family, and then another 25% is saved against emergencies. So that is a recommendation for devotees who also, if they are householders, they have to act responsibly. If you have a family, you can't act like a sannyasi and create a difficult situation for your family members. You have an obligation to provide for them. So a householder is expected to maintain some stock of food, some Lakshmi against emergencies and so on. That becomes necessary. Things happen and you can't anticipate everything that may happen, so you have to be prepared. That becomes your duty. Um, I want to say that, my gosh, another senior moment, really helps to have adequate sleep. In the absence of that, things don't work right. I completely lost my train of thought. Have I answered your question at all?
Yes,
Krishna.
that's helpful. I think I was just confused because Nagari is a hunter. Like he's a hunter, but he's also a grihasta because he's married. So that I think where's my confusion was falling. But yes, you explained it nicely according
Okay.
to what we're
Yeah. So he's an exceptional case. By the arrangement of Narada Muni, who was it that was with Narada Muni? Was it Ranga Rishi with him again? They seem to be buddies. Anyway, a specific arrangement was made for him that his necessities would be supplied by the local villagers. Um, so that was the Lord's mercy on him. An arrangement was made to facilitate his complete surrender, um, and that may happen for anyone, but not necessarily. So the advice for us is that we follow that example of Srila Rupa Goswami. As far as burdening the temple, if one has surrendered in devotional service, um, uh, relying upon the temple for one's needs is not a burden. It's Srila Prabhupada's arrangement that his offer to anyone and everyone is come to our temple and surrender to our program, follow the program, follow the regular principles, render service to your capacity, and in exchange, we will provide you with shelter and clothing and food. Um, that's just Srila Prabhupada's mercy on those who want to take up the process of devotional service. Because a devotee does not want to um, burden the temple. We don't want to take as far as possible. We want to give, but devotees who have renounced worldly life and have taken up residence in the temple, they're giving everything. They're giving their life. They're giving all of their time and energy to devotional service. So, by Krishna's arrangement through the agency of his pure devotee and so on, our necessities are provided. Uh, and that's the way the process of Krishna consciousness works. Krishna provides, he'll supply all necessities for those who surrender to him. There's no necessity to make any separate endeavor. But householders are uh, are expected um, to have children, and they have to be equipped to provide for them. So typically, a householder requires some means of income, um, and then he follows that example of Rupa Goswami dividing up his wealth in order to ensure that the needs of his family members are met. But for those who are single, you can simply surrender to Krishna's temple and not have to divert any of your time or attention to matters of personal maintenance. Everything is taken care of for you. Is that okay? Are there any other questions or comments? Krishna. Krishna. All right. If there are no further comments, no questions, I guess we can end here. Yeah, 4 minutes, 3 minutes before 8 o'clock.
I could say something, Prabhu.
Fire away.
I was just remembering this verse the other day when Madhu Panlila was giving class, and now as we're talking about entanglement. Srimad Bhagavatam 1:114, Apana Sansritim Ghoram, Yanama Vivashogranam, Tata Sadyo Vimuchyeta, Yad Bibheti Svayam Bhayam. Living entities who are entangled in the complicated meshes of repeated birth and death can become freed immediately by even unconsciously chanting the holy name of Krishna, which is feared by fear personified. Just lastly, remembering this nice quote from the Bhagavad Gita introduction, where Krishna says, or Srila Prabhupada says, the mind is restless, but it can rest in the sound vibration of Krishna. Speaking of the mind. Thank you.
I thank you. You are an ocean of nectar. I'm always impressed. You familiarize yourself with so many verses. It's wonderful to see. I remember when you were in diapers. I had no idea you would blossom into such a wonderful Vaishnava. Yeah, you in the temple room one day, your sister was laughing hysterically while you were doing a booty dance in a diaper. Anyway, it's wonderful to see the extraordinary devotee that you have become. Wonderful thing. Thank you very much for your regular contributions. Any other last minute comments or questions? We don't have the darshan of Sri Radha Damodar here. I don't think so. We could go overtime if someone wanted to. Evidently not. All right then. Thank you for putting up with me. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Sri Radha Damodar ki jai, Sri Nittai Gaur Sundar ki jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna Prabhus. May you be well and forever ecstatic in the Lord's devotional service. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Taraka Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.